Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host. I'm a filmmaker on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode, I pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on streaming. I pick a favourite film from that topic and battle it out against a guest to decide which film would become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 2. Hello, podsters or podderoonies if you prefer. We are back for part 2 of our Zendaya movies episode. And of course, you know this is the part of the show. At the top of part 2 of every episode, I have a look at your Instagram responses from the previous episode on Instagram. And the Dominicate podcast, formerly Spoil My Movie podcast, went with the most recent one, the most sympathetic towards the creature, and the other half went, Ellie Nora 93 went with Young Frankenstein. I'm curious, Derick, what is your Frankenstein movie of choice for you?
I'm not really a big Frankenstein guy. I'm more of a Dracula guy.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking about there's that David Harbour Netflix thing. There's a couple offshoots like Lisa Frankenstein and Young Frankenstein is obviously so good. But I think I got to go with the Del Toro, the 2025 one. Yeah, that one's it's just, I love Guillermo del Toro, and I just think Oscar Isaac and Jacob Elordi are so incredible in that.
Yeah, I'm so pleased it's been nominated for Oscars, and I do hope it wins something tonight. Or tomorrow morning for me. But it's a fabulous film, and it won obviously last week, which I was happy with. But my girlfriend was not, but she's a huge fan of Young Frankenstein. But well. But it is my choice now for Zendaya films, and I think this choice is valid because I think she's arguably the co-lead, possibly. I went with Dune Part 2. I was toying with the fact that with the kind of the Spider-Man films, and we have covered Spider-Man No Way Home, and we've covered Spider-Man Far From Home as well, and we've never actually talked about Homecoming on the podcast. So I did think about Homecoming a bit, but that's the one film that she's actually not in that much compared to the other two. So I felt like I wouldn't be very justified in really picking that one. So then when you picked Challengers, I only really had one option for me, and obviously she's only really in it at the end of Dune Part 1, really. She's in Visions in Part 1, and I don't think Malcolm and Marie stood a chance against Challengers, so ultimately I went with Dune Part 2. And we've also covered back in the day The Greatest Showman as well. Again,
yeah. She's the good part of that movie. I don't like that movie, but I like all the stuff with her and Zac Efron a lot. I was I just want to see that movie. Just give me their romance and make it into a whole thing. I don't need this biopic about this terrible person.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also not a big fan of it. I don't get the love for it. I think I think fans of it love the music, and that's what's great about that film is the songs. But as a film as a whole, I don't think it's that special at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I went with Dune Part 2, the incredible Dune Part 2 from 2024, directed by the great Denis Villeneuve. And I think for me, Villeneuve is one of the best directors we have at the moment. He's arguably, better than Nolan and of his kind of generation, and he's one of the best around for me. Going from these great gritty thrillers from Prisoners and Sicario, and moving into sci-fi with Blade Runner 2049 and now the Dune movies. It's just they're quite good.
Yes.
So what happens in Dune Part 2? Well, going to IMDb as I always do, Paul Atreides unites with the Fremen while on a warpath of revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family, facing a choice between the love of his life and the fate of the universe. He endures to prevent a terrible future. I'm not sure it's the fate of the universe. It's more of the fate of the galaxy.
Yeah,
That's how I read it. But yeah.
Right. I guess that comes from Dune was written in a time where there wasn't that much of a distinction between universe and galaxy. We didn't have that much of a wider understanding of the universe back when Heinlein was writing these books in like the 70s.
Yeah. So initial reaction from you, Derick? Are you a fan of the Dune movies?
I am. I generally like them. I'm a big Villeneuve fan. I love all of his movies. And I think that this one is a stronger film than the first one. You know, I'm not always a fan of when they break a book up into two movies. And I think a lot of the times the one that ends up being a lot more hurt by that is the first movie. So this one, I think it does work as part of a greater whole. I think both the Dune movies are really good together, I think.
Yeah, I'm always kind of torn between like which is better. Is it part one or part two? I feel like I've seen Dune part two more now than part one, which obviously doesn't make sense. But yeah, it's a difficult one. But I think like with Dune part one, I'm always going back and forth, which is my favorite. But like Dune Part 1 has this kind of elegance to it with the pacing and the structure and just building this world. And I feel like always the original film, the first one in anything, has the harder job to just kind of create the world that these characters are embodying and living in. And I think the first one does an incredible job of that. And even to keep the pace at a certain pace in the first one is quite remarkable as well. And you've even got a character called Duncan Idaho,
yes,
who sounds American.
But I used to think it's like that would be like in this far off flung future. That's going to be the most exotic name ever.
Yeah. But I think, and then when you have Dune Part 2, it really builds on the world that's already been established. You don't have to explain anything, which is obviously a commonplace with sequels. But with this, just the epic scope of it with this, it just feels extremely grand in every aspect. It's quite wonderful for me. Yeah, it's quite
epic is the right word. Epic it really is, because it feels like, you know, Dune is one of these big, just like these totemic sci-fi things. And obviously there have been, you know, films and attempts at the past. You have the Lynch version, which is very weird, you know, as all Lynch films are, but weird in a different way than most Lynch films. There's the Tarkovsky, what's his name? Tarkovsky's trying to make his version of Dune in the 70s, which would also have just been just batshit.
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, I think that it was the right approach to split this big, huge novel into two movies, because it seems like probably too much for one film. And, you know, there's so much insane lore with this thing. And, you know, just these huge, big desert sweeping landscapes and these like incredible, like, battle sequences that are happening throughout. You know, this is a real epic movie. And I'm glad that Villeneuve finally got a movie that did very, very well financially. He finally has like a series that it seems like is and do very well for him, because obviously he's had some success before, but a lot of his films, like, you know, Blade Runner 2049, while being incredible, have underperformed at the box office, and this did not. This did very well.
Yeah, that shocked me quite a lot, actually. I was so excited for Blade Runner 2049, and that really did surprise me that not a lot of people went and saw that, especially when you got big stars in it like Harrison Ford and Ryan Gosling, and it's like, it didn't make sense to me. But obviously, I don't know, maybe it was just too Blade Runner-y. I don't know, too deep into that world, not enough accessibility. I don't know, but this one, it's just, for me, it's so well balanced with action, with spectacle, with character work, with pacing. And I feel like Denis Villeneuve has such a deep understanding of pacing, and I know I realize I'm saying pacing so many times, but I think that's just such an important aspect of these big films, because there's such an easy kind of way to navigate these films sometimes and just rely on spectacle, but he really remembers the characters here, and he really remembers what's important in each of these scenes as you move through the film. It's just so impressive for me. But yeah, one of the main things that's kind of incredibly impressive for me is when Paul is like riding the sandworm for the first time. That was like incredibly epic. There was a moment where like the worm is about to like hit the dune, and then all of a sudden you see like a bit of the curve of its mouth, and I literally said like holy shit out loud in the cinema when I watched it for the first time. Like, and then the sound was so deep that my chair was like vibrating. You know, I was frankly like squinting at the screen because the amount of sand they were kind of frankly chucking at Timothy Chalamet. But before that, like, Denis Villeneuve is very patient with the scene and focuses on every kind of detail to create the anticipation and build up. Keeps it very character focused in the beginning of that scene until, you know, the sandworm reveal. Like, you have kind of very specific shots on all the characters, and you see Paul walking along the dune. You see him trying to operate the thumper. You see all the other characters kind of reacting to that. Every detail is very meticulously planned out, and I really like that attention to detail in kind of... I think Villeneuve recognizes that this scene is essential for this story. And you've got kind of some comedy in there with Stilgar saying, you know, this is when you become Fremen or you die. You know,
every one of his lines is just so great. Like, I loved that performance. And yeah, I totally agree with you about the world feeling just so real and gritty and dirty and lived in. I think that the world building in this movie is absolutely incredible. Like, you get a real sense that, you know, especially of the Fremen, who are you got some of their stuff in the first one, but you're really understanding like this is a culture that has existed on this planet for thousands of years. These people have like grew up in the desert. They have these customs. They have these very specific ways of life. They have these ways of living, and it all just looks so good. This looks like an actual alien planet. You know, the sandworms look incredible, especially, you know, when you go back and you watch the David Lynch Dune, which even for the 70s had a pretty sparse budget, and this is a 2024 movie with an incredible budget, and it looks so good. And you know, that the stuff on Arrakis, the world building so good there, but then you'll also get glimpses into, you know, they go to like the Harkonnen home planet, and it's like because it's next to like some kind of weird sun or something, like everyone there is in black and white, and you get the fireworks, which are these like goopy things, and just like it's so well done. You can tell that they really put a lot of thought into this and did their best to translate this very, very dense world. Where, because if you get like Dune fans of the books, they will tell you like stuff for hours, just like, and just go on and on and on, and it's like you can only do so much of that in, you know, 2-hour films or whatever. So you just get glimpses of this world building, but it all feels very real. I think they did a very good job of translating from the books, you know, all of this information while not overloading you. Because once again, that you know, the Lynch version, they had to like give people pamphlets to like be like, this is what this thing means, this is what this means. And you know, part of that is putting it, like stretching it into 2 movies and having the time able to afford this stuff, but it never like feels like it sacrifices, you know, any character development or any of the plot stuff to like stop and tell you like, oh well, you know, how like this house has like these atomics because of this reason, and like the Fremen like take the water out of the, like it always works itself into the story in a really good way.
Yeah, it always feels very organic, and it always feels like it's in the right place at the right time for you to gain this cultural knowledge about whatever race and culture we're focusing on at that particular moment in the film. And the cultures and the races are very well defined, and you really get those feelings across very clearly, and especially with the Fremen in particular. And Javier Bardem is a great example of really expressing how sacred like their culture is in terms of like how precious and what water means to them. Like near the beginning, Rebecca Ferguson, who ends up being the Reverend Mother and the mother of Paul Atreides, she is pregnant and she's like throwing up, and he looks kind of disgusted that like she's just throwing up water, and he's like, no, don't do it, and it's just like, oh no, that's really not a good look for you, love. No. And then when you get to like the temple, that was just kind of an incredible scene where when I first saw that for the first time, I didn't know there was water there. I just thought it was just, that's the way the floor looked. You can't see the water because it feels like a complete mirror. And like the two different sides of the Fremen, like the north and the south, get really, really well explored here in this film. The south are more fundamental to believing in the Lisan al-Qaib and i.e. the Messiah, whereas the north very much they're about the people, and they see the Lisan al-Qaib as a myth, and they fight for each other more than anything. But yet, like, water is very much completely central to both those sets of Fremen, the north and the south. So, and I feel like Stilgard is a very good kind of bridge for that as well in this film as you go forward. Stilgar is just such an interesting character because he is a character that is very much a believer in the Lisan al-Qaib, the Madib. And it's interesting because, like, he very much believes in it, but a lot of the other Fremen kind of make fun of that. And he's from the south, living in the north, with Zendaya and a lot of the other characters that we spend time with. And it's certainly a device where Denis Villeneuve is using this character to kind of create this more of a sort of moral gray area of and obviously using Zendaya's character as well, and who has an opposite view that, you know, she's with the people and they need to fend for themselves. Yes, use Paul, but for his good qualities, not as, you know, the Messiah, the Lisan al-Qaib. And so I think Villeneuve just uses kind of that dynamic, that feel with these moral grey areas with Paul Atreides' journey through this, that, you know, maybe Paul is not on the right path for the Fremen, really, and that kind of the humor that comes through in this with Stilgard kind of gives you that sort of aspect that maybe, like, this is not the way it should be going for the Fremen and Paul Atreides. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, the humor kind of distills this kind of belief in Paul a little bit.
Yeah, it kind of, like, you know, puts him at ease a little bit, I think, right? Is what you're saying? Or yeah. No, and I really like all of that stuff. I think that's the thing that resonates with me most about this movie, is because on the surface it seems like a very traditional hero's journey, you know, about this, you know, quote unquote white guy showing up at this, you know, and seeing there's this desert land where there's a resource that everybody wants and is fighting over. And, you know, on one level it could seem kind of jingoistic and kind of like it's playing into the classical hero's journey / chosen one, like here's the chosen Messiah, you know, the white savior tropes. But I think what Herbert, and by extension Villeneuve, is doing is a real deconstruction of that kind of Joseph Campbell and like arc, because he's saying, like, yeah, there is this like character, this kind of chosen one character, but it's someone who has been created. They have actively cultivated this religion. You know, they are the ones who the Lisan al-Qaib exists because of the mothers, you know, the that order, like basically cultivating that and creating that and making this myth of this like person who would come and do all these things. So it's really deconstructing that myth. And I think that a thing that people get hung up on a lot of times is, like, at the end of the movie, you know, Paul is like going on this, you know, basically he's like, I'm gonna go wage genocide across the universe and like you like essentially use these people who like see me as like a messiah figure to conquer a war in my blood, in, you know, my bloody name. And the thing is, like, Paul is bad at the end of this movie. Paul starts as a nice little soft boy in the first one, and over the course of this movie, you see him basically turn into a tyrant. And I think the way that it is commenting on like how we let these narratives like that are we construct about like, oh, here's this like savior, this chosen one that we still see so much today, like come into the world and they're like, oh, this person's going to save us. That's actually a very bad thing. It leads to some very negative consequences for people worldwide believing in these figures. So I was a very big fan of that. And you mentioned the way Zendaya kind of like looks at him, differently. I was about to call her Tashi. Looks at him, differently as Chani. I love that, early on in the movie when they like first kind of get together romantically, he says to her like, I would love to be equals with you. Like that's the whole thing is like she sees him as an equal. And by the end of the movie, he no longer sees any of the Fremen, including her, as an equal. And he tosses her aside for a political alliance, for a political marriage, and has everyone kneel to him. All of the Fremen have to kneel to him because he is now like superior to them or whatever and will lead them. She's obviously the only one who doesn't kneel. I love that she's like, we used to see me as an equal. You no longer see me as an equal, so I can't follow you anymore. She lets herself have that one tear, which, as we talked about, the water that like escaping from your body, whether it's vomit or tears or anything, is so like, and so that she allows herself to have just like that one tear for him. But then she rides off like a badass on that sandworm. She is. And that's why I think this is a very valid pick for a Zendaya movies, because I think she is far and away my favorite character in this movie. I have a Funko Pop of her somewhere around. I would not get a Funko Pop of Paul Atreides, like Murder Atreides.
So it's from part one.
Just as this is the good version. It's like a meme, just like, you dated the dictator of Nicaragua. It was before that, So I'm a really big fan of her performance in this film.
Yeah, it's interesting. You say she gives like a tear to revive Paul essentially after he is effectively dead, I guess. Because I think in the book he does die, but in this they kind of write it a little bit differently. I think Ferguson says that his vital signs have just gone so low that he looks dead. But she had no control of that though. It was a Bene Gesserit kind of Jedi move, that made her do that from Rebecca Ferguson. And of course, the Bene Gesserit Dune was a huge influence on Star Wars. That's why I mentioned Jedi. You're right. Zendaya is so key to this film, and it's so kind of telling that she is at the end of the focus of the end is her. It's not on Paul at all. And that's not necessarily like sequel baiting for part 3. That's just, I mean, it could be, I don't know, but it's just, it definitely gives you that sort of this moral complexity to the film that we're not ending on Paul at all. We're ending on Zendaya, this kind of sense of hope, that a kind of a lonely hope that she has compared to everyone else. Arguably the situation has got a lot worse than it's actually gotten better, and everyone's kind of been fed a lie, arguably. Villeneuve is very much focusing on that at the end. And what also I kind of find interesting as well is just kind of Paul's Messiah struggle throughout the film as well, and it's certainly the focus of this film. And it's kind of interesting how they build up the pressure of that, of his decision to travel south in particular. Like his visions tell him that billions of people will die if he travels south and completes his destiny as the Lisan al-Khaib. Then like Gurney Halleck turns up and reveals that the Atreides have hidden atomic missiles, and then like Fade Rafa blows up the Fremen temple. So all of these kind of events force his hand a little bit ultimately to drink the water of life, to open his mind and see all possible futures, but all kind of Chani wants for him is to kind of lead her people south to gather kind of reinforcements and fight back, but still be true to who he is, to the person she knows before she drinks the worm piss. It's just fascinating kind of the subtle change as well from an acting point of view after he drinks the water of life / worm piss. Then then Timothée Chalamet is kind of amazing when he addresses kind of the Fremen people. He basically uses fear and uses the Fremen faith in him as a weapon for revenge against the Emperor, which is kind of the opposite of his kind of father's teachings and using the Bene Gesserit ethos. Fear is the mind killer as his ultimate weapon, as in killing the Fremen minds to follow him in a way. So it's just kind of a really interesting way kind of the story kind of develops, that playing devil's advocate a little bit for Paul, that he's very much under a lot of pressure. You know, he didn't ask for any of this, really. He didn't ask for these abilities because he's kind of bred to be like this from, you know, the Bene Gesserit. This is, as Charlotte Rampling says, we're planners. You know, we've been planning this for years, generations. So I do have a little bit of sympathy for Paul in some aspects, that a lot of these events are kind of forcing his hand, and he's trying to keep everyone happy and trying to do the right thing, but not, and ultimately not in the end, but for the people itself. He's just kind of creating more war. Yeah, what's your angle in what do you make of kind of the buildup of pressure to make that decision to actually take the water of life for you?
Right. It's interesting because it feels like, yeah, like you said, it's kind of Paul gets more or less painted into a corner where he's like, this is really the only option. But over the course of the film, you know, at least the first half, like Paul seems like he's doing this, you know, fighting for the Fremen in a very noble pursuit, where after that, it kind of seems like he has shifted from being a liberator to a conqueror. But I think even in those first scenes, while he is acting like he's a little more altruistic, I still think, like you said, he is ultimately kind of driven by revenge. You know, while he is talking about, like, I want to do this for the Fremen, stuff like that, I, you know, want to free you from the Harkonnens, you know, and I think he does legitimately love the Fremen people and, like, is, you know, like being embraced by them and, you know, loves that. I think his real motivation is the hatred for the Harkonnens, is wanting revenge for the murder of his father. And that's why he's trying to, you know, free Arrakis, is because he wants to stop these people that murdered his dad, even though, as we said, that's not what his dad would have wanted. And that's why, you know, ultimately he is willing to, I think, drink the water and go south and become this horrible person, is because that's where this started. It did not start from a place of, like, seeing that these are oppressed people and I want to come here and help them. He gets put in this situation, a bad situation. He decides to choose violence, essentially, and that's why he gets caught up in this whole thing and, you know, drinks the water. And I love that when he's, like, talking, he's like, I see one path forward. There's one way we can win this. And it's like, yeah, you do see maybe the ways that this would go down would be, you know, worse for you, would be worse for, you know, some of these Fremen people, but also in the long run, it's going to be worse for everyone in the universe. Because as he said in the first film, he said billions will die in a holy war fought in my name. So while ultimately, like, yeah, you are liberating Arrakis, you have now just made them into these, you know, these warriors that are just there to die for you in the name of your, like, honor and all this stuff.
I feel like in Paul's eyes as well, he's seeing all these possible futures and he's just like, okay, the only way to get change is to break the system, break this kind of imperium that's been in place for millennia, I guess. And yeah, this is my opportunity to do that. And in his mind, it's like, yeah, this is the only way to achieve that, is to unfortunately create this holy war between the great houses and fuck everything up and kind of build from the bottom again. I don't know.
But the thing is, he doesn't tear down the Imperium, right? He wants to be the new emperor to the point where he's like, to secure political power in the old system, he is like, I will have the hand of the emperor's daughter. You know, I will have Florence Pugh, who's, I guess her character is kind of the narrator of the book. Like, not the narrator, but every chapter, I think, opens with a piece of dialogue from her, whereas, like, she also opens the David Lynch movie. So it's interesting that she's not in the first one at all, but, like, you know, becomes kind of a more point of view character in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Also with Paul as well, that there's that reveal that Rebecca Ferguson's character, his mother
Lady
is
Jessica,
a
yeah.
daughter of Harkonnens. She's a Harkonnen,
Mm.
which obviously makes Paul a Harkonnen.
Yeah.
So
So it's
there's
like you're just like these guys. You're just easy. You're part of this evil clan that you hate.
yeah. So there's definitely this element of obviously revenge of what the Harkonnens did to the Atreides and his family, murdering them all, but also there's this element of self-hate that he's going through as well, that there's a little bit of like compassion has been lost with understanding that he is of Harkonnen blood as well. So that certainly is unfortunately something that's kind of backfired on him, and learning that knowledge by taking the water of life. That's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out moving forward, how he kind of uses that knowledge, certainly with his relationship with Lady Jessica as well. So yeah.
And with whatever happens with his sister, who's we get to see just a second of Anya Taylor. Like she's mostly just like a fetus talking to Lady Jessica, but then there's that scene where it's like Anya Taylor Joy jump scare, and it's just like, oh, look, she's in this, And so obviously, like much like they did with Zendaya in the first one, with her just being in a glimpse for a second, they're setting her up to be a bigger character in that next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson's character is really interesting. Like all the stuff with like you see all these kind of shots of inside the womb, and I feel like it's very experimental at times, like very abstract with this fluid, and it's mainly just dark blue tones of nothing in particular, really, just fluid. It just gives you this kind of weird feeling. I kind of love that moment as well, where kind of the baby opens its eyes and it's all blue. It was a tad freaky to me as well. But yeah, her performance overall is just really kind of quite menacing. She has sort of a more of a gritty feel, and she's very much portrayed more of an upfront villain at times, frankly.
Yeah, no, I'm always a huge fan of hers. I was very upset with the way the last couple of Mission Impossible movies did her dirty. And like even in something like Mercy, which is an objectively just horrible film, she's good. It's like she's always good. So it's like, it's nice to see her get a really interesting role with a lot of depth, because Lady Jessica, I think, is a character that is, complex. She's very selfish. She's doing all these very manipulative things. Like there's those moments where she's like, we have to go after, the weak non-believers first and convert them. I think she's so like, she really does a good job of giving you the idea of what the Bene Gesserit is up to.
Yeah, I kind of love those kind of scenes where she has outside of her scenes with Paul. Yeah, she's very aggressive, very to the point, and just like, we need to manipulate these people in a very non-subtle way with her acting and line delivery. But when she's interacting with Paul, it's less so. And it's just like, okay, yeah, I can, because she's taken the water as well. Yes, she's not like Lisanne Al-Khaib and the other Kwisatz Haderach that the Bene Gesserit believe in. But she kind of has a bit of foresight with the fact that she has drunk the water of life herself to be a reverent mother, and and she has all the kind of the memories of the previous reverent mothers. Ugh, can't say that word. But so she's very subtle with what she's saying to Paul, and not trying to manipulate him to kind of sort of be overbearing in terms of what she's trying to say to Paul, to really kind of make Paul make his own mind up and make make the decision that he ultimately makes, but not trying to like really push it. So I kind of like that aspect of the film with her character.
Yeah, no, she's great, and I love that there's that little moment at the end with her and the mother, where she says to the other mother, she's like, "You chose the wrong side," and she's like, "Jessica, you all people should know that there are no sides." It's like all just machinations, and like the Bene Gesserit has plans within plans, and apparently, like I guess the lore is that like Paul was supposed to be a girl, and he was supposed to have like him and Fade Routher were supposed to like have a kid that was going to rule the universe together, but she like kind of changed that and messed it up. So I don't know. There's a lot of she's like somebody who is a manipulator, but even within the group of manipulators, she's making her own plans.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a bit more about like the cinematography here from Craig Fraser. I think he's absolutely incredible. Even with like the opening scene with kind of that deep orange cinematography, kind of a great understated action sequence was great, and just has a great combination with the music as well in that scene in particular. And then you have kind of this very dark, misty cinematography during like Dave Bautista's attack, where he ultimately just kind of runs away in fear, and you have these great shots of the Fremen taking out his men in quick succession. That was great. There's just a lot of different scenes where you can really feel like the baking heat of the sun. You know, they were able to capture these kind of thermal waves off the sand so well. It's amazing how many different feels they're able to create with just like a desert landscape at the end of the day. Yeah, I was so impressed with Craig Fraser here.
Yeah, no, it all looks really good. You know, all this stuff on Arrakis looks incredible. It looks like, honestly, it looks like a lot of it was just like shot at magic hour, you know, like when they're outside. But then there's also those incredible action scenes where they're like, get the rocket launchers and they're like shooting the Harkonnen, you know, like those crawlers and everything. But then you'll have those scenes that are set on other planets, and they have a completely different look and feel than anything else that is happening in the movie. So yeah, really immaculately shot movie. Was very much a fan of the cinematography of this thing, and you know, there would be like I feel like there was like lens flares and stuff, and just it really got the vibes of what it was going for.
Yeah, absolutely. Top marks there for the cinematography.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about Paul and Chani's relationship, because there's just so much to kind of dive into here. I guess maybe, I mean, there's some like criticisms, I think, for me, and it you know, their relationship maybe is not as strong as it could be. Like, I think, you know, is my only criticism. You know, they're both kind of acting their asses off, and the music is trying to help as much as it can, but because there's so much going on, I feel like the emotions that the film is trying to hit at the end don't quite work as well as they could have, certainly from a romantic point of view. But on multiple viewings, I think it does sit better with me, certainly this time watching it for this podcast. But I guess also it's kind of a consequence of the focus throughout, and by the end is kind of the emotional politics of the film rather than their relationship. Plus, at times it feels a bit kind of choppy as well. Like there's a moment where Paul is like tasked to travel across the desert to prove his worth and prove that he's one of the Fremen, one of the tasks that he's got to do. But then before you know it, Paul and Chani are kind of battling a spice harvester. So you don't kind of necessarily feel that kind of time and energy that he spent to actually make that journey. You know, the spice harvester attack is still very cool though, but I think in every kind of interaction they have, even if it's quite small on this kind of grand scale, there's plenty of like strong storytelling going on between them, even if it's just a look here and there. And like when Paul rides kind of the sandworm for the first time, like Chani's like cheering, but notices everyone else is in kind of shock and cheering too. And then Chani doesn't look so comfortable with that. So, you know, there's a lot going on in the film. And overall, after watching it, I think this is my third or fourth time watching this film, you know, their relationship gets better and better for me. But yeah, I think certainly from a romantic point of view, it's not the strongest as it could be, possibly. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, I think from my understanding is that in the novel, she's not really that deep of a character. She's pretty surface level, and that a lot of the stuff, like they still have a relationship, but like I don't think she really is as interesting as she is in the movie. And I think that comes from, you know, the screenplay and also the performance, like, you know, and that I think comes through where, you know, she like they just kind of get together maybe because like he you get why I think he likes her, because he has these dreams in the first one, and he's, you know, sees this beautiful woman and he's like, oh, like I'm ready to be, but I don't really get that much of an impression why she's impressed by him. But what I do think really works is the feeling of betrayal at the end, when you just see as I alluded to earlier, everyone's kneeling, and he's like, "I'll take your daughter." And it cuts to her for a second, and she just looks like she got hit by a truck. She has just been like, "This was my, my love, my, like, the person was my equal, and he was helping my liver and my people, and I was in love with him, and he just betrayed me." And that's why I love that scene where she just rides off into the desert, and is just like, you can see her just like getting really emotional for a second and then just shutting it down. That's where I think like the love story really hits, is when it's at its end and you're seeing her be like, "No, fuck this. This is so messed up. You just threw me aside because you wanted to like build some political alliances." And even it's hinted at earlier when Lady Jessica, I think, says something like, "You need to save your hand for the most opportune alliance," or whatever she says. And you're like, "Oh, this is not going to turn out good for our girl Chani."
No, absolutely not. It's really interesting, Chani's sort of expanded character for this film, and as you say, I don't think that the character was that like big of a story element in the book. And certainly going back to kind of Paul's destiny and in the way they kind of balance out his kind of moral grayness in this film, like overall, like the film feels very morally grey for Paul. There is a level of sympathy, as I said, I have with Paul, because he has these kind of unwanted abilities and basically bred to become a potential Kwisatz Haderach by the Bene Gesserit, and his own mother is a Bene Gesserit, and he feels kind of so burdened by destiny that he has to make some super hard choices at the end of the day, and marries off with Florence Pugh's character, the daughter of the Emperor, to essentially free the Fremen in his eyes. But the question is always, how different will he be from the current Emperor, that a foreign figure is now like the leader of the Fremen people? And when the book came out, I think the readers' views were very much in favor of Paul's actions in the 60s, which made kind of Frank Herbert write Dune Messiah.
Right. Yeah,
so I think Denis Villeneuve does a great job of making Paul's story more morally grey and making Chani more of an important figure in the film. Like, as you say, like as we've both said, like the last shot is on Chani, and that's no accident at all. Like the film is kind of saying that she has Paul actually changed at all? Has anything actually changed at all? For the people of the Fremen, it's very much like The Godfather in that way. The fact that Al Pacino closes the door on Faye Dunaway at the end is a very kind of similar vibe, just done on a desert planet and with science fiction vibes. But it's definitely that same feeling that you get at the end of the first Godfather.
Right, because it's, we're so used to arcs of like characters becoming better, and it's not often that we get arcs of characters becoming worse. And then obviously, like you mentioned, the most famous one is The Godfather, but I think they're a little more common in dramas like that. They're even rarer in like a big budget sci-fi blockbuster, that it's like actually about this person becoming morally, just terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved Austin Butler in this film as Feyd-Rautha. It takes a while for him to show up, but I absolutely loved his character here. And I love how unpredictable he is by just kind of randomly slitting people's throats when he gets slightly annoyed, or just testing out the sharpness of his new blades.
Or kissing his uncle.
Yeah. The scenes with him in the arena are amazing. This monochrome cinematography is incredible, kind of representing this black sun on this stadium. Apparently they filmed it in kind of infrared, with infrared cameras to get that look. It's no like normal black and white photography at all. Like the blacks look ultra black and the whites look very bright, and yet the level of detail on the actors is still there. I also loved the way kind of the cinematography changes from like color to black and white as you see Baron Harkonnen come from his booth out to kind of the balcony area from color to black and white. That was just so technically incredible. I'm like, how the hell did you do that?
Yeah, that looks so cool.
Yeah, and even with kind of the framing of the fights itself the arena fight and the kind of the fight at the end, I think Denis Villeneuve isn't one to like complicate things. You know, he makes it very simple, not many cuts, and really relies on, well, not relies, but just kind of shows off the actors and just to show you these guys are actually doing this, and it looks very visceral, you know. So he's very conscious of the fact that he doesn't need to do too much with that. And even generally for the whole film, to be honest, like, because the film just looks incredible, the production design looks incredible, there's so much detail in here. Like with his previous films like Sicario and Prisoners, there's an aspect with Denis Villeneuve that he does very like subtle things with the camera to really put his own kind of emotional standpoint with the camera in those films. With this, he doesn't need to do it so much, and I think it's there in moments. It definitely is, but he doesn't need to do it as much because of the grand scale of this.
Yeah, no, it's a lot bigger and grand because he's made obviously movies that are very, you know, big productions, but this is a true epic, like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or some like one of the grand all-time epics, and he shoots it, you know, appropriately. You know, he shoots this thing like it's Ben-Hur or something, right? Where it's just like this larger than life thing. I love, you know, the thing you were saying about shooting with the infrared cameras because it does look very bright and like even like the blacks are so much bolder. It's like those ads you see at the beginning if you go see like a Dolby movie. It's like the colors are so much brighter and the blacks are so much blacker. You know, you like really feel that as opposed to like, you know, I watched you know, the black and white version recently for my podcast of Nightmare Alley. You know, the Del Toro one, and that one has a black and white look, but it's much more noir-y. It's like older, it's washed out. Whereas this is like it really pops, and there's so many choices like that throughout the movie that I feel like are really just strong directorial ideas. And yeah, I agree with you saying about Butler being very good. You know, he gives this very hauntingly like psycho performance. Like, you know, he has that line of like, I've killed family members before. You know, he's kind of doing like a Stellan Skarsgård impression, interestingly enough.
Yeah, well, he's got that like really great, like dark, deep, gravelly voice. I love that bit before they fight at the end when Paul is like, "Hey, cousin." It's like, cousin, cool. He's like excited by that. He's not like, pissed off or angry.
He's like, "Huh? What do you know?
I love killing my family."
Yeah. Was that thing about your knife chipping shattering? Cool. I'll repeat that back.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's somebody who I always say he's like somebody who loves doing a weird voice. Obviously, he does a Stellan Skarsgård voice in this one. He does some kind of weird voice in The Bike Riders. He's doing his Elvis thing in Elvis. So he's very, I don't know if he's method, but he really gets into it with his choices, you know.
Well, yeah, famously Austin Butler was stuck with that kind of Elvis voice for a really long time. He couldn't get out of it. But yeah, going back to that stadium scene in particular, just with that black and white, it's just very obvious that this feels very fresh and new, even though it is essentially black and white, if you know what I mean. Because what I noticed this time around when like Austin Butler has got his mouth open and it's all black inside. It's very deep black, and it's like that's just not how it would look in a normal black and white movie,
right?
You know, it's very much, it's like when you're editing photos on your phone and you just put up the contrast like really high, you know, to make it look, well, frankly, ugly. But you know what I mean. And but here it's just done in such a way that it just looks quite remarkable and it definitely gives it that incredible sci-fi feel that this just doesn't feel normal.
Yeah, it doesn't really look like anything else, you know, like you shouted out Greg Fraser, you know, I think his cinematography, not just in that scene, but in everything, makes this look so distinct and different than, you know, if you were just to go watch like a Star Wars movie or something like that, you know, like that style has become very, you know, like a lot of the sci-fi movies, I feel like kind of have the same look. Whereas this thing, I think, does have a much more distinct feel to it than anything else you would see. And I think that comes from, Villeneuve being like a really masterful visual storyteller, both in terms of just like him putting something on screen that is going to like teach you something about the world in terms of the world building or something like that, but also just in terms of like making shit that is unique and interesting, that drawing cues from these really cool novels, but like showing you them in a way that you might not expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's also really impressive as well, he's not necessarily relying on like the incredible special effects to tell the story as well. Certainly with like, for example, like with the Bene Gesserit power, like you have that kind of interesting scene with Lea Seydoux and Austin Butler, and she kind of finds him in the kind of one of the giant corridors on the Harlequin homeworld. And there is a little bit of color there in those scenes, but not much. But when they're kind of, he ends up having his knife by her neck, and then all of a sudden, like they're outside her room, like the guest room, and it's just like, well, how did we get here?
Yeah,
and it's just like, it's just a simple cut. He just uses simple cuts like that, and he does similar things when in the first one, in part one, between Charlotte Rampling and Paul Atreides, Timothy Chalamet, when you have the Dom Jabbar scene with the pain box, and this just kind of simple cutting when she says "come here," and it's just done with cutting. There's no like special effects of essentially as we kind of know it, like the Jedi power, the telekinesis power of bringing him forward. There's no kind of weird slow motion effect there. It's just cutting, and it's just. It just feels more sort of well thought out, that he doesn't need to like go to that toolbox, if you will, to make this film feel special still.
Yeah, and then on that same vein of like when she uses the voice and the cutting and everything, the sound design in those scenes is also just so incredible. Like the way that they have it, where like it just kind of like the other sound drops out, and it's just like this thing. It's very, especially if you see it like in a big theater, and like the sound is just like right. Because I remember that was one thing I was talking about when the first one came out. I was like, seeing this thing in a theater is a lot, like, because it was day and date on HBO Max that when that first one came out. And I was like, no, I'm going to see this in a theater on like a big screen with all these effects and like the sound, because when you have like the full surround sound, and you're getting all of those sound effects maximalized to the way they should be, which is, like people always give, like, for example, like Chris Nolan shit for like, the not being able to hear things in his movies. But that's because, a lot of times they are optimized for these theaters. And so seeing something in a theater like this with like the sound coming exactly where it should is so impressive. And it's not just the voice, but like all of the sound, like the sounds of the desert, the sounds of like wet, like the steel clashing against each other, the rocket launchers. It's all so well done, and it's once again part of that whole immersive experience that this movie is providing by doing stuff like that. Like I said, they like shot for like 3 days at magic hour, just so they can like have a very distinct look. So they really put in the effort on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the voice change in using the Bene Gesserit power, like that is the special effect.
Yeah.
That's what they use. That's it. And it's so powerful because there's no kind of natural. A lot of the time when the Bene Gesserit use their powers and you get the voice change, there's no like obvious like dialogue rhythm where you feel like you can see it coming. It's almost as if it's like done as a jump scare almost. It definitely takes you back a little bit. It gives you that little bit of a surprise. It's that kind of powerful when you watch it.
Yeah, it really is
rather.
Impressive. Yeah, it's a really impressive effect in the movie, and like every time it comes up, it just kind of like launches you into it and lets you know, like, oh, this is this sound combined with like the editing, like you were mentioning, really does convey the power of the voice.
So talking about some of the other characters, like Christopher Walken as the Emperor, he's not in it that much, but is incredible in those kind of final scenes with Paul when he's saying that the reason we killed your father, Leto Atreides, is that he had a heart and was a weak man, essentially, basically saying he was messing up the order of things in the galaxy. So but when he's delivering those lines, they sort of have more impact coming from such a great like Christopher Walken. Maybe, yeah. And also he was probably just, I don't know, maybe given more specific direction, so he wasn't talking, in his way of talking. Very stuttery kind of thing.
I think the Walken, just by casting him, is such a smart move, because it's not necessarily stunt casting, it's just smart casting, right? Because Walken, it's almost like the same thing as like when Matt Damon shows up in Interstellar. You're like, oh wow, like okay, like this is, you take notice because this is an actor that you know very well for playing with Walken. He's such a prolific, huge actor that I think you need to cast somebody as the Emperor who is like commands that presence immediately without having to say anything. As soon as you see Walken, you're like, oh, that's Chris Walken. He seems like he could be like a crazy space emperor. Like that immediately checks out. Like that's just really smart. Like if you would just cast like whoever in that, like some unknown actor, it wouldn't have the same effect as casting this big name who has been prolific for so long, who has so much respect and can, has this soft but very commanding voice at the same time. And when he's able to just like say a couple things, like you were saying about like, that's why we killed your dad, you're like, oh shit, like this is Christopher Walken here.
Yeah, I really like Stellan Skarsgård as well as Baron Harkonnen. He's amazing. Not enough like black oil scenes for me. But I love that moment when he's been kind of struck down by one of the Imperial soldiers, the Sardaukar, and he's grasping for the throne on his knees. That was just kind of a great moment for me from him.
Yeah, I'm always a Stellan Skarsgård. I like all the Skarsgårds, but yeah, Stellan Skarsgård is always great to see, and he's just in this big, gross like bodysuit and is like being dripped in black goo and floating on the thing, and it's such a good moment when he like finally gets cut down and he's crawling along, and Chalamet kind of says like grandfather and stab, like he's got this fear because he is so imposing. Yet like, and there's that scene where you see just like the women with their like necks snapped or whatever, but at the same time he's like, you also realize he's ultimately very fragile. Like it's this interesting dichotomy that exists within this character, and yeah, he's great. Obviously, we've talked about Chalamet. This is the episode, and she's phenomenal. Butler's doing his own weird thing, and yeah, like Josh Brolin coming back is really cool to see, because a lot of those characters from the like the world of Josh Brolin don't really come back. Like you don't see a lot of those people from that world. They're all like pretty much dead at this point. But it's nice to see him show back up. And then I think Javier Bardem for me is just phenomenal. Like every line that he says is hilarious, but it's also
it is written.
Like you just crack up whenever he says anything. But it's also he's also giving you so much like good world building stuff and moving the plot along. I thought he just stole the show for me, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was saying, like the humor that comes with his character kind of distills this belief that Paul could be the Messiah. I think that's just such a clever move to just make this character kind of essentially the comic relief, but it's done in such a clever way in terms of the whole grand story of what's going on here.
Because you're getting sucked into it a little bit like he is, It's this legend of Paul. It makes it a little bit easier too, because you're like, oh yeah, this is fun. This rise of this guy. Yeah, we're having a good time.
I also really liked Charlotte Rampling as the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit. She's always so great, a very powerful presence on screen. I love the confidence in some shots where she's kind of wearing this giant veil, and you can barely see her face, but you can definitely see her eyes. So very well designed with the shots yes, you can barely see her face, but the eyes are just so piercing that there's still plenty of presence that they can play with her scenes. Not many, but like it's still really well done with her scenes.
Yeah,
and certainly from a lighting and a costume perspective.
Right, and I think like in a similar, not exactly the same, but like similar way of like casting Walken, you're casting somebody who is like this kind of iconic character. So, it makes sense to have this, very respected old school British actress in the role.
Absolutely. I really loved the final battle, not because it was just incredibly spectacular, but because it was not too overblown like a Marvel movie sometimes. Like, you have these frankly incredible shots of all these kind of sandworms coming in and attacking the Imperials. There's like an amazing shot of the Fremen like riding the worms, firing rocket launchers at the buzz copters. Can't remember what they're called, but that was very cool. There's a few like great oneers on Zendaya and some of the other characters on the ground, and there's even like space for some like gorgeous landscape shots of, again, like seeing the thermal heat coming off the sand in the distance and seeing these huge vast legions of people looking like dots. That's not a criticism. It just shows you the grand scale of what we're dealing with here at the end. And then Denis Villeneuve has the patience and confidence as well to keep the focus on the characters, and especially like inside this kind of metal pop-up temple, if you will, for the Emperor and the Harkonnens, and they're just waiting for the doors to burst open while this kind of huge battle is going on. Like, most directors, frankly, would just follow the lust of focusing on the visual spectacle of this battle throughout the whole scene towards the end. So it's so well balanced for me when like Paul like enters and and at this point he feels like he's got so much aura around him and danger when he walks past everyone. It's just so brilliantly judged by Villeneuve in just creating that level of suspense and tension, and yet you have this giant battle outside. It's not like a really long wait, but it's just a great confidence for me in just choosing to do that in the first place when you have like giant worms going all over the place.
Right. Yeah. It gives you enough of the battle, and it looks incredible. Yeah. It does look a lot better than a lot of modern blockbusters will have like a VFX team working on the final battle, before the script is even done. They're just like, okay, we just have to get to this point and have these beats. Whereas this, it felt like, okay, this is naturally like it, looks consistent with the rest of the movie. It works really well, but then it goes into a more personal thing. You go back, and then the final confrontation is not this crazy battle with hundreds of people fighting or anything. It is two dudes having a fight with daggers. That's what it really comes down to. It's such a personal thing, and I think this is another reason I prefer it to the first film. Is the first film ends in a similar kind of battle, but I feel like that one doesn't have the emotional stakes of this one. It's just kind of like, okay, Paul, the emotional stakes are just, is Paul going to kill somebody for the first time? But the person who he is, the person he's fighting doesn't really, like, we don't have that much of an emotional connection to him like we do with Fade Ralph, who we've seen throughout the movie, and he's, how much he's like a Harkonnen, and how that represents what Paul hates about the people who killed his father, but also about himself and how he's his cousin. And it's this very Shakespearean final showdown almost between the two of them. And I love that's the way the movie ends. Or at least, that sequel, before, that the kind of like zenith, like the climax of the movie, is there.
Yeah, absolutely. The fight is really well done. Apart from the killing move always slightly confuses me a little bit.
It is that is a little bit.
Because he Fade Ralphus like stabs him in the stomach practically, and then he uses with Paul's knife, I think, and then he tries to stab him again with his own knife, and Paul catches the knife in his hand, and you can definitely feel the blood coming off his hand at that point. And then kind of off camera, he takes the knife, he stops that knife, but then with his other hand stabs him. I kind of get the idea of what they're going for. Like, you think Fede Ralph has killed him at that point, but no, it's actually, so it's kind of a little kind of surprise reveal moment, if you will, that, oh no, actually Fede Ralph has died. So I get that, but it just felt a little confusing. But that's my only criticism of the direction of this whole film, frankly. Yeah.
And it's a little bit like, okay, I get you're trying to fake us out. It's a little quick, it's a little confusing.
Yeah.
But also, like, we know you're gonna make a Dune 3. We know there's like 8 more Dune novels. Like, we know, like, this, like, we've seen movies before that he's probably not going to die right here. Like, it's a little bit of a, like, all right, it's a little cute.
Yeah, I think it's just that thing of just like you have that, you know that Paul isn't going to die, but we want to make you think he could
right
for that split moment. So overall, certainly the those final scenes in terms of action were just perfectly judged in terms of pacing and everything. Excellent.
Yeah.
Favorite shot or scene for you, Derick?
Honestly, I think it is that final sword or dagger fight. You know, I think it is.
Really, yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, you know, aside from the quibbles of how it ends aside, I think it's just the emotional climax of the movie. It's what everything has been building towards, this final showdown between the two of them. I think it is really well done. I think it is really well acted. You are just getting the culmination of, you understand from everything that's happened with Fade Ralph that this is a psychopath. And you understand that this is kind of like the fate of the universe hangs on this. And you're really invested. It's shot so beautifully. Everyone's just kind of sitting back and watching this, you know, really cool sword fight. It pays off the battle from the first one, the slow knife thing and all that. So yeah, I think it's a great ending to the movie.
Excellent. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with kind of those moments after Paul Atreides drinks the worm piss for the first time. I love kind of that slow walk Paul Atreides does when he enters the Southern Fremen temple. You know, and you have that incredible shot of the sandworm coming up from behind him out of focus, and you have all the kind of the thermal rays, if you will, all kind of blurry as well. That just felt so epic. And then you have this massive bird's eye view shot of people where Paul is kind of moving through the people like he's in a human bubble kind of thing. It just felt really powerful to me because it was kind of the first moments of sort of slow-mo action from Paul Atreides after he drinks the water of life, and you're just like, oh, okay, what's happened to him? It just felt so epic to me, so that's what I'm going for.
Yeah, no, very epic, very much capturing that big, you know, epic man in the desert, Lawrence of Arabia feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Directing score, Derick, for Dune Part 2 for you.
I'm going to give this one a high score, I think, because of all the reasons we talked about, how well Villeneuve like captures every single moment of this. I'm going to give this a 9.5.
Excellent. Yeah, I think this is kind of close to perfect for me for directing, but I know that we've had a lot of 10s, but I've said in the past, people are afraid of 10s, and frankly, one of those people is me. So I'm going to go 9.8.
Okay.
So it's an extraordinary achievement. It really is incredible. Favorite lines, Derick? What do you got?
I didn't have as many as in this one, but I did like the line where Timothée Chalamet says, "I would like to be equal to you." I thought that was really good and set up everything that would happen between the two of them. And then I thought, like, everything Stilgar says, I don't have a specific one, but just like him yelling "Lisa al-Ghalib" or like that is what the chosen would do. Like anything he says was great. And then in relation to that, when they talk about him being from the South and Zendaya says, "You don't hear his accent," I thought that was a good line.
Yeah.
Like, because they actually use what actor's real accent as part of the plot, so I thought that was funny.
Yeah, he sounds Spanish to me. Yeah, a lot of Stilgar ones. I've got, "It is written," again. And also, like, early on in the film, he says, "I have seen the signs." And Zendaya's like, "Again?" Again, some really great poignant ones at the beginning from Rebecca Ferguson. She says, Lady Jessica, she says, "Your father didn't believe in revenge." And Paul says, "Yeah, well, I do."
Yeah.
It's one of those lines where it feels quite powerful, but you kind of forget it as the film goes on. From the dying Reverend Mother, when she says, "What have we done? She is pregnant." I thought it was quite a powerful, I know that's subtitled, but it's quite a powerful line. That there's some great Harnacken ones as well. Baron Harnacken, where he says, "Tighten your grip, Raban, or feel mine on your neck." That was quite menacing. Some great ones from Austin Butler as well. Some really funny ones, darkly funny, where it's like, would you like some fresh meat, my darlings? Lungs, liver, what would you like here? They're big. They're big today. Like before his fight. Oh, I loved Gurney Halleck as well. He gets to sing in this as well, which is great. My still suit is full of piss. My hand is caked in sand.
He's great. He's really great. That's one of the things I think about, where both performances I think Brolin is really good, and that's we got an early Patrick Stewart in the old version, and I think both of them really do a good job with Gurney Halleck.
Absolutely. Billions of corpses scattered across the galaxy, all dying because of me. Because you lose control, because I gain it, is a really good one between Gurney Halleck and Paul Atreides. One of the funniest ones, again, from Austin Butler. Bring his body to my quarters. My poor darlings are hungry. There was no food for them on the flight.
Just very, very twisted. It's a very it gives you a good idea of what this guy's character is like.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, really? A really kind of dark one from Paul Atreides when he kills the Baron and literally just like wastes no time and just stabs him in the neck, and he says, "You die like an animal." I was like, "Ooh, that cut, that felt deep." That, and you're just like, "Ooh, this guy is not good now."
Yeah, no, it seems to have gone down a dark path, perhaps.
Yeah. Again, Austin Butler. Any special attention for the pet during the fight scene? So screenplay score, Derick. What are you going for Dune Part 2?
So this one, I think this is where it's going to be a little bit lower for me than a lot of the other stuff, because as I talked about, this is a good movie, but it's a good half of a movie. Like this, that's the problem you always run into when you split these books into, 2 films. While you have the pacing is a lot better and stuff like that, sometimes you're like, there's not really a beginning, especially since this is meant to be kind of part of a trilogy. There's not really an end either. They do have the end, but it does end on that like big cliffhanger. A lot of the stuff that has been building towards is unresolved. It's the same problem that you run into like with, Hunger Game when Mockingjay got split up, or like the last Harry Potter film, I think. And it just feels like this is all just a lot of resolution, and then, but this one, there's still more to come. I think that the second film in a trilogy can be really good. I think both The Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, and Empire Strikes Back are the best of those series, but I think both of those end with a really definitive big punch. The Battle of Helm's Deep is so like incredible, and then the I Am Your Father like cliffhanger is so good, whereas this kind of like he was my grandfather gets resolved immediately, and there's not that big of a punch ending and like not really a beginning either. So as much as I like the screenplay, I think that it's missing a beginning and end. So I give it a 7.5.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I still really like the screenplay a lot. I get what you're saying. I feel like there is an element here that you can watch this by itself in a way. Obviously, that's not the ideal way of watching this at all, but certainly as a second film, I think it is still really impressive from a screenwriting point of view. And as we said, like to get across all these different kind of cultures and how well they're portrayed, and we're getting very specific cultural things and story plot points in such a clever way is still, with so much going on, I think it's still really impressive. As I said, my main criticism is just I didn't quite get like the kind of the romantic element enough. There wasn't. I didn't feel the love between Chani and Paul enough, really, and I think that stuff gets taken over by the emotional politics of what's going on in this world, which is a slight shame. But still, overall, like an incredibly good film. So, in terms of a screenplay, again, but there is a little bit of a choppy aspect of it. But again, I still think the pacing is still incredibly good. Yeah, your 7.5 has thrown me a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could watch like a Two Towers or an Empire Strikes Back or even a Catching Fire on its own a lot easier than I could watch this one on its own. It did, because I didn't watch the first one, and I did feel that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, so I feel like I'll go like an 8.8.
Okay. Right.
It's still very good. Very good.
I didn't hate it. I think 7.5 is still a very respectable score.
Yeah, absolutely. Favorite performance for you?
I think it's definitely Zendaya. Like she absolutely kills it. She's the emotional heart of this movie. I think she's the character that is the most relatable, and I think she, has a role that is not an easy role. I think she has to go through this like love and heartbreak and be someone who believes in him while not ultimately drinking the Kool-Aid. And I think she's just really freaking good.
Yeah, she's incredible. I'm going to go with Austin Butler for me. I think just his crazy kind of demeanor. He has this kind of very unpredictable menace about him. You just never know what he's going to do. And I always kind of love it because when he was cast, everyone was like, huh, really? Austin Butler as Fade Ralpha, this kind of ultimate sci-fi warrior? This is quite an iconic character from sci-fi literature, and you're casting the guy who played Elvis.
Right.
You know, so that was quite a move from the casting directors here. And boy, did it pay off. I think he's absolutely outstanding. Yeah, Zendaya, incredible as well. Definitely echo the same thing. She is the emotional heart of this film. And yeah, watching it for the third time, when Paul Atreides says, I'll take Florence Pugh as my wife, you can really see the pain in Zendaya's performance there, that, oh my God, this is actually happening. What's going on here? What's happened to Paul? You really get that on her face. But like the whole cast is kind of incredible as well. Like there's so many characters here and they're all on their A game. I feel like, even though a lot of these characters don't have a lot to do necessarily, they bring their A game. They're really at the top of their game with such little screen time. So yeah, fantastic. But yeah, I'll give it to Austin Butler. Acting score for you though.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, we just went on about how great a lot of these performances are. I think everyone in this is really good. I don't think there's one performance you can point to and be like, well, there's the one who's off. Like everyone's so good, even people we haven't talked about, like Léa Seydoux are really, really fantastic in this both, and I think that the, returning cast meshes very well with, the newcomers. Like the only small ding I would give this is, I think, like you said, there's a lot of people in this with not a lot to do, like Dave Bautista doesn't really have anything to do. He just kind of gets replaced by Butler. And I liked him so much in the first one. And, as good as Walken is, he's not really in it a lot. So those are minor quibbles. I'd say I'd give this one a 9.
Cool. We haven't really talked about Timothée Chalamet's acting in this, but he's still like incredibly good as well. Kind of that subtlety he brings after he drinks the water of life is quite amazing. He definitely brings this, almost a little bit like Austin Butler. He brings this kind of unexpected, bubbling sort of rage as well, and it all kind of comes to the fore when he's kind of addressing the Fremen towards the end in the south, in that southern temple. Yeah, he's quite incredible as well, frankly, and you can really feel the weight on his shoulders. When acting as well.
Yells, like when he'll just like shout, he's like pounding on his chest, like you're like, oh dang, he's not the like little soft boy anymore. He is like becoming the dictator at this point. You can see it.
Yeah, and as I said, you can really feel the aura that's coming off him in those final moments. Yeah, especially when he walks into the pop-up temple. So yeah, everyone's really good. So I'm going to go like a 9.4 for me. For Dune Part 2 with the acting.
Very nice.
Right, let's add up the scores then for Dune Part 2. Dune Part 2 gets exactly 54 points. So, Challengers wins.
All right.
With 55.5 I'm going to say that's a bit of a shock, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I mean, I was not sure how well it would do, because it's like what, the 84th highest film on Letterboxd or something. Dune 2 is, so
yeah, that's quite. Yeah, still, both films are an exceptional viewing experience. Yeah,
I feel like most of these films would have beaten a lot of either one of these would have won.
It's been a lot of
heavy
good
hitters.
films this year.
Yeah.
In most other podcasts, I think Dune Part 2 wins, but yeah, I still really love Challengers, but I wasn't expecting that. Okay. But next episode, as The Devil Wears Prada 2 is coming out, we'll be focusing our attentions on Anne Hathaway films, and we'll be having a returning guest, a League member coming back, Claire, and other co-presenters, I believe, from the Why the Flick podcast. So do check that one out. That should be very exciting. Always a great chat with her. Derick, you have been amazing. This is your opportunity again to tell us about your podcast, and where can we find you, sir?
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. I have had an amazing time being here. But yeah, if you are listening to this, you can check me out on Underrated Movie Podcast. However you're listening to this, you can also go to underratedmoviepodcast.com. Listen to episodes. There's links there to like all of the podcasts. I do some other podcast stuff besides Underrated, but that's the main one. And you can also find Underrated on all social media at Underrated Movie Podcast.
Excellent stuff. Right, it's time to say goodbye, people. I know it's very sad, but we gotta go. I gotta go to bed. And Derick's got to enjoy the rest of his day.
Yeah, watch the Oscars.
Yeah. Right, it's goodbye from Derick. Bye-bye.
See you guys. And
it is goodbye from me. When I have a cocktail next, I will not be drinking anything that is bright blue. Thank you very much. Goodbye. That's it for part 2. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 1 if you haven't done so already. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell me what your favourite films are relating to the episodes. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for X at FVF_podcast. Plus, we are now on YouTube, so hit that like button and comment there. If you do, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.